The sound of a tense, rhythmic ocean swell and distant, ominous musical chords. Narrator, it was a confrontation that defied all logic of naval warfare. A single destroyer, barely 2,000 tons, against the most powerful surface fleet Japan had assembled in years. 5 battleships, including the largest ever built, their guns capable of obliterating the smaller vessel with a single salvo. This was not a battle. It was a death sentence. Yet, on the morning of October 25, 1944, in the waters off Samar in the Philippines, the USS Heermann and her crew would not run. They would not surrender. They would charge. This is the story of how one U.S. destroyer faced 5 battleships, and the miracle that followed. Music shifts to a more grounded, yet uneasy, tone. Sounds of gentle shipboard hum and occasional radio chatter. Narrator, to comprehend the sheer audacity of what transpired, we must understand the players on this vast, blue chessboard. The USS Heermann, a Fletcher-class destroyer, was part of Task Unit April 3, 77, callsign Taffy 3. Commanded by the resolute Rear Admiral Clifton Sprague, Taffy 3 was a support unit, built around 6 slow, vulnerable escort carriers, nicknamed Jeep carriers, and screened by a handful of destroyers and destroyer escorts. Their mission was mundane but vital: provide close air support for General MacArthur's troops invading Leyte and conduct anti-submarine patrols. They were the guardians of the supply line, not the tip of the spear. The Heermann herself, under Commander Amos T. Hathaway, was a fine ship for her role. Her 5.5-inch/38 caliber guns were excellent for anti-aircraft defense. Her 10-21-inch torpedoes were a threat to submarines and light surface ships. But she was utterly outclassed by what was coming. What was the Japanese Central Force under Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita. Having miraculously slipped through the San Bernardino Strait undetected, Kurita's armada now descended upon Leyte Gulf. His hammer was Battleship Division 1, the sister behemoths Yamato and Musashi, each displacing over 70,000 tons and armed with 9 18.1-inch guns. Supporting them were the veteran battleships Nagato, Kongo, and Haruna, accompanied by a powerful screen of heavy and light cruisers. Their objective was simple and brutal: smash the American landing forces at Leyte. For the men of Taffy 3, the dawn of October 25 promised another routine day of launching aircraft. They were about to become the anvil upon which the entire Pacific campaign would be decided. The first salvo, sound of radar pings intensifying, a single alarm bell begins to ring, music becomes a throbbing, anxious pulse. Narrator, at 0647 hours, the routine shattered. A lookout on one of the escort carriers spotted what he thought was flak on the northern horizon. Then, a pilot returning from patrol radioed in a frantic, unbelievable report: multiple large warships, closing fast. On the bridge of the USS Fanshawe Bay, Admiral Sprague initially dismissed it, convinced the ships must be part of Admiral Halsey's Third Fleet. That hope evaporated into the salt air as lookouts with powerful binoculars confirmed the worst. The distinctive, pagoda-like masts of Japanese battleships and cruisers pierced the horizon. On the bridge of the Heermann, Commander Hathaway watched the same nightmare unfold. Through his binoculars, he could see the enormous silhouettes growing larger by the minute. He knew the numbers. His ship weighed 2,050 tons. A single broadside from the Yamato weighed more than his entire command. His 5-inch shells would be like pebbles thrown against the 16-inch armor belts of the enemy battleships. His only meaningful weapons were his torpedoes and his ship's speed. The math was simple, and it was terrifying. By 0658 hours, the first salvos arrived. The sea around the tiny American task unit began to erupt in colossal geysers of water, some tinted green, some yellow, some red, the Japanese using dimarkers to distinguish their fall of shot. The shells themselves were a new kind of terror. Men on the decks of the carriers and destroyers described the sound not as an explosion, but as a freight train tearing through the sky, a deep, unnatural shriek that preceded the towering plumes of water. The ocean was being methodically plowed by high-explosive steel. Admiral Sprague, with no heavy units to call upon, made his only possible move. He turned his carriers into the wind to launch every available aircraft, and ordered a full retreat towards a squall line to the east. It was a race for their lives. And to buy time for that retreat, he issued the order that would echo through naval history. To his destroyer screen, he commanded, "Small boys, attack." Japanese soldiers moving in jungle, and at the center of this maelstrom was Sergeant Jack Coghlan. A 24-year-old from Montana, Coghlan was a natural outdoorsman and a reluctant but highly competent soldier. He wasn't a grizzled veteran of a dozen battles, but he possessed a quiet, unyielding fortitude that his men respected. He was given command of a reinforced squad, tasked with establishing and holding an advanced observation post on the forward slope of Mount Austin. Their mission was critical: to act as the eyes and ears of the battalion, to report any enemy movement, and to blunt the spearhead of the impending Japanese assault. They were the tripwire. Little did they know, they were about to become the entire dam. The world for the crew of the Heermann dissolved into a cacophony of sensory overload. The deafening, rapid-fire crump of their own 5-inch guns, firing as fast as their crews could load them. The shuddering, physical impact of near misses that hammered the hull like a sledgehammer, knocking men off their feet and shorting out electrical systems. The constant, high-pitched whine of shrapnel slicing through the air and ricocheting off steel. Pause, and through the smoke and spray, the enemy loomed ever larger, not as ships, but as moving mountain ranges of gray steel, their main batteries flashing with fire that was both magnificent and horrifying. At approximately 0750 hours, the Heermann closed to within 9,000 yards of a Congo-class battleship. "Stand by for torpedo attack." The order echoed through the ship. On the torpedo mounts, crews strained, their faces set in masks of concentration, launching a full spread of Mark 15 torpedoes into the churning sea. The fish were away, but in that moment of commitment, the situation grew even more dire. Emerging through the battle smoke on an almost collision course was the heavy cruiser Haguro. The Heermann was now caught in a vice between a battleship and a cruiser. Hathaway, with ice-cool nerves, ordered a hard turn to starboard, the destroyer heeling over sharply, narrowly avoiding the Haguro, and lining up for another attack run. He was now dueling with two capital ships at point-blank range. He fired his remaining torpedoes at the Haguro. In the ensuing chaos, the battleship Haruna was sighted turning away sharply, evading the Heermann's first torpedo spread. It was a small, tactical victory in a sea of catastrophe. But the storm of steel was unrelenting. Then, it happened. A 14-inch armor-piercing shell from a battleship, likely the Haruna, slammed directly into the Heermann's wheelhouse. It tore through the chart room, wrecking navigation equipment and interior bulkheads, and failed to detonate. It was a dud. A miracle in a steel cylinder. Had it exploded, it would have vaporized the bridge and killed the command staff. The ship was being bracketed, the shell splashes walking closer with every salvo. It was only a matter of time. Music shifts, becoming more determined, incorporating heroic, driving themes alongside the chaos. Sounds of continuous 5-inch gunfire and low-flying aircraft, narrator, yet, the Heermann was not alone in her fight. The other small boys were waging their own suicidal battles. The Hole and the Johnston, though mortally wounded, continued to absorb punishment and draw fire. And from above, a different kind of miracle was unfolding. The pilots of Taffy 3, flying from their vulnerable Jeep carriers, launched into a relentless, almost hysterical assault. They were flying TBM Avenger torpedo bombers and FM-2 Wildcat fighters, obsolescent aircraft against the most modern anti-aircraft defenses in the Japanese fleet. Many had no torpedoes, no bombs, no armor-piercing ordnance left. So, they attacked with what they had. They made dry runs, pretending to drop torpedoes, forcing the Japanese ships into frantic evasive maneuvers. They strafed the bridges and upper decks with their .50 caliber machine guns, aiming to kill admirals and disrupt fire control. It was a bluff of monumental proportions, a swarm of hornets attacking a herd of elephants. And it worked. Commander Hathaway, seeing the Japanese formation beginning to lose its disciplined cohesion under this constant, multi-directional harassment, pressed his attack with renewed fury. The Heermann became a phantom in the smoke, emerging to fire her guns, then disappearing again. Her gunners, operating on pure instinct and training, focused their 5-inch fire on the bridge of the heavy cruiser Chikuma, which was relentlessly pounding the American carriers. They achieved the impossible. They managed to suppress the Chikuma's fire control, scoring enough hits to cause chaos and confusion on its bridge, spoiling its aim. Then, a tremendous explosion amidships rocked the Chikuma. While the final blow may have been delivered by aircraft, the Heermann's aggressive, point-blank gunfire and torpedo attacks had crippled the cruiser and left it vulnerable. The tide of the battle, imperceptibly at first, began to turn. The sheer, unrelenting, and illogical aggression of the American destroyers and aircraft created a perfect storm of confusion for Admiral Kurita. He began to believe he was not fighting a mere escort group, but the vanguard of Halsey's powerful Third Fleet. Fearing his force was being drawn into a trap and concerned about his own fuel and ammunition status, Kurita made a decision that stunned his own crew. At 0911 hours, he broke off the engagement. The order was transmitted: all ships, cease action. Reverse course. The giants of the Imperial Japanese Navy turned away. Music becomes solemn, reverent, and slow. The sound of gentle waves and a lone, mournful wind. Narrator. As the Japanese fleet retreated over the horizon, an unnatural silence fell upon the waters off Samar. The cost of Taffy 3's stand was staggering. The destroyers USS Hull and USS Johnston had been sunk, along with the destroyer escort USS Samuel B. Roberts. The escort carrier USS Gambier Bay was also lost, the only American carrier sunk by naval gunfire in the entire war. Over 1,000 American sailors made the ultimate sacrifice in those brutal 2.5 hours. The USS Heermann had survived, but she was a floating wreck. She had been straddled by over 150 shell splashes, struck by that miraculous dud 14-inch shell, and pockmarked by countless smaller caliber hits. 5 of her crew were dead, many more wounded. But they had held the line. Their actions, a breathtaking display of sheer courage and tactical aggression, had achieved the impossible. They had stopped the most powerful Japanese naval force of the Leyte campaign, saving the vulnerable invasion fleet in Leyte Gulf from utter destruction. The battle off Samar entered the annals of history as the U.S. Navy's finest hour, a testament to the notion that the strength of a crew can outweigh the tonnage of their ship. For his conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity and extraordinary heroism, Commander Amos T. Hathaway was awarded the Navy Cross. The USS Heermann and the other ships of Taffy 3 received the Presidential Unit Citation. They had not just faced 5 battleships, they had, through will and sacrifice, forced them to flee. Music swells into a soft, poignant, and reflective theme. Narrator. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to World War II Records as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life.